On the island of Alanos, off the coast of Greece, a teenage girl once spent her days diving into clear blue water and dreaming about the future. Caroline Crouch had grown up in the kind of place that made the rest of the world seem far away. Her parents, David and Susan, had left Athens when she was 8 years old and settled on the island because they had fallen in love with the coast. Caroline grew up with salt water and sunlight as her backdrop. Passionate about scuba diving and swimming, the kind of girl who seemed entirely at home in the world around her. That world shifted in 2017 when Caroline was 15 years old. During a Good Friday parade, she encountered a man named Babis Anagnostopoulos, known to everyone around him as Babis. He was 27 years old, financially comfortable, and worked as a commercial helicopter pilot. At some point during that period, he flew a helicopter over her school. For a teenage girl with a romantic imagination, it was the kind of gesture that felt pulled from a dream. Babis was charming, clever, and well off. He knew how to present himself and how to make an impression, and Caroline was completely taken in. The two began a relationship and moved quickly. On July 15, 2019, they married in Portugal. There was no large celebration, no extended family gathered in a church, none of the tradition that a Greek wedding typically carries. They eloped. At the time of the proposal, Caroline had been underage, turning 18 just 3 days after he asked. What felt romantic in the moment was something else beneath the surface. Removing her from the orbit of family and ceremony, keeping the union quiet and private, this was the first deliberate act of isolation. After the wedding, the couple settled in Glykkanira, a suburban area on the outskirts of Athens. Caroline enrolled in college while Babis continued working as a pilot. On their social media accounts, the two appeared content. There were photographs and posts that presented a life filled with warmth and happiness. Followers saw a young couple building something together, a home, a future, a family. What those photographs did not show was what was being written in private. In her diary, Caroline told a different story. She wrote about fighting with Babis and how serious those fights had become. She wrote about wanting to leave and going to her sister, about being unsure if she could stay. Throughout the marriage, Babis had grown more controlling, more manipulative, and increasingly difficult to live with. He was the only source of income, and Caroline was a university student without financial independence. Money her mother Susan sent from abroad was taken by Babis. The financial dependence was deliberate and total. The diary entries grew heavier as the years passed. She wrote about loving him so much that she could not leave even though the relationship was causing her pain. She wrote about a tearful confrontation where she told him she wanted to go but could not bring herself to follow through. When she became pregnant, she made the decision to stay so that her child would not grow up without both parents. On the day their daughter turned 1 month old, Caroline wrote in her diary that she had told Babis she wanted to leave. The entry described feeling awful. By May 2021, Caroline had reached another threshold. Phone records from the hours before her death show argumentative and combative messages between her and Babis while both were inside the house. A text sent to a friend revealed that she was threatening to leave him. She had also attempted to book a hotel for herself and her daughter for that same night. At 4:30 in the morning on May 11, 2021, Babis contacted emergency services. He had duct tape over his eyes and mouth and was barely able to form words. His hands and feet were bound behind his back. Through muffled sounds, he managed to communicate that intruders had broken in. He gave his location. He asked for an ambulance. Emergency operators could barely understand him, but the distress was unmistakable. First responders arrived at the 2-story house in Glykkanira around 6 in the morning. What they found inside was complete disorder. Drawers were emptied, belongings were scattered across every room, and furniture had been disturbed throughout the living space and kitchen. Lying open on the floor was a Monopoly board game box. The money inside it was gone. A security camera that had been mounted in the living room was sitting on the couch with its memory card removed. From the staircase hung the body of Roxy, the family's 7-month-old husky puppy, strangled with her own leash. In the main bedroom, Babis was found on the floor. His mouth and eyes were covered with duct tape. and his hands and feet were restrained behind his back. On the bed, face down, was Caroline Crouch. Beside her, their 11-month-old daughter was crying and clapping, pushing her mother repeatedly, trying to get her to wake up. Caroline was dead. Her daughter appeared physically unharmed. When Babis was freed from his restraints and saw his wife, he went into visible shock. He described to the officers who arrived what had happened. 3 men wearing hoods had broken into the house in the early hours of the morning. They spoke with Greek and Albanian accents. They had come in through a basement window after failing to force open the rear door. They murdered the dog, they entered the bedroom, restrained him, blindfolded him with duct tape, and then went after Caroline. They repeatedly asked where the money was. Babis told them. The money, 10,000 euros in cash, was hidden in the Monopoly box. The intruders took it along with jewelry valued at around 20,000 euros. He described one of the men's hoods falling during the struggle, giving him a brief glimpse of the intruder. Based on that description, a sketch was created of a tall, overweight, dark-skinned man. He identified 2 weapons as well, a black pistol and a silver Colt. He told investigators that after taking everything of value, the intruders smothered Caroline with a pillow before leaving, assuming they had left no survivors. The story had the weight of tragedy. A young mother killed in her own home during a robbery gone wrong. A grieving husband who had survived by luck. A baby girl left without her mother. 3 days after the murder, Caroline was buried on the island of Alanos, the place where she had grown up and where her parents had chosen to make their lives. Babis stood before the cameras and spoke about his wife. He said he had been lucky to meet her, lucky that she had loved him, and even more lucky that she had been the mother of his child. He said his daughter would grow up not remembering her mother. He said Caroline was the joy of life and would always be near through their daughter. While the funeral was taking place, a car was pulled over during a routine stop in northeastern Greece. The driver, a 36-year-old Georgian national, handed over a passport that turned out to be forged. The man was identified as Georgi Haragivali, a violent criminal with a long record of break-ins across Athens. He had been responsible for at least 12 similar crimes over the preceding 6 months. 3 of those crimes had taken place in the same neighborhood where Babis and Caroline lived. One of them, in December, had followed a pattern nearly identical to what Babis had described. A group of men entered through a rear window, dragged a female occupant by the hair, threatened to kill her, and made off with 10,000 in cash and jewelry. Another robbery in March had involved tying up multiple people, including an elderly couple and a cleaning woman. Haragivali bore a resemblance to the sketch. He had a history of exactly the type of organized violent crime that matched the description of the incident. He had been trying to flee the country when he was stopped. Everything pointed toward him. He was arrested and held for 4 days. Physical pressure was applied during the interrogation. He was asked repeatedly about the house, the entry point, the murder. He emerged from those sessions with a concussion. He maintained throughout that he had never heard of Caroline Crouch. The evidence against him did not hold. He was cleared. 3 officers from the Athens homicide unit were demoted. The investigation shifted toward an Albanian organized crime network. A list of 100 suspects was narrowed to 10. Photographs were shown to Babis. The case remained unsolved. A large monetary reward was offered and went unclaimed. Weeks passed. Residents of Athens were unsettled, and the public was running out of patience. 37 days after Caroline's death, a small memorial service was held for her on Alanos. Among those present were investigators who had been quietly re-examining the details of what Babis had described. They waited until the service ended and then approached him. They told him they had new information and asked him to come with them to Athens to identify a suspect. Babis agreed. The details he had provided were being measured against what was physically and technically possible. The basement window through which the intruders supposedly entered was very small. The physical description Babis had given of the intruder made it impossible for that man to have fit through that opening. The neighbors had reported no sounds of a house being ransacked during the night. No calls for help, no infant crying. What they did hear was a dog in distress. The memory card for the living room security camera had not been taken by the intruders. Data recovered from the camera showed that the card had been removed at 1:20 in the morning, hours before the supposed break-in. There were no fingerprints anywhere in the house. There was no DNA. Caroline had been wearing a smartwatch that continuously monitored her heart rate. The data from that device told its own story. At 3:58 in the morning, her pulse indicated she was asleep. At 4:05, her heart rate had spiked by 50%, consistent with sudden severe physical and emotional distress. At 4:11, it stopped. This was before the time that Babis had given for when the murder supposedly took place. Babis had a fitness application on his phone that tracked movement. During the period in which he claimed to have been restrained, the application recorded him moving. Investigators attempted to recreate his account of dialing emergency services using his nose while bound and blindfolded with duct tape. No one could do it. There were no intruders. There had never been any intruders. Babis was told that he was the suspect. He was presented with the evidence systematically, every inconsistency laid out without ambiguity. He was interrogated for 8 hours, then he broke. The confession that followed was not clean or honest. He attempted to frame what he had done, to soften its edges by placing blame elsewhere. He said the couple had argued on the night of May 10th. He said Caroline was determined to take their daughter and leave, and that the thought of losing the child had made him lose control. He said Caroline had pushed him and punched him, and that his judgment had become clouded. He said she had thrown the baby into the cot. Then he described what he did. He strangled her. He pressed a pillow over her face using his full body weight and held it there. He killed her in front of their 11-month-old daughter. Afterward, he considered disposing of the body but concluded it was not possible. He decided instead to stage a home invasion. He trashed the house himself. He removed the memory card from the security camera. He killed Roxy with her own leash and hung the dog's body from the staircase. He placed his infant daughter next to the body of his wife. He hid the cash and the jewelry. He bound his own hands and feet with rope and covered his eyes and mouth with duct tape. Then he made the phone call. The performance lasted for 37 days. He gave interviews. He answered questions on social media. He thanked supporters. He stood at his wife's funeral and spoke about love. Caroline's medical examination had shown that she had not died instantly. The attack lasted approximately 6 minutes. Bruising across her body indicated she had fought back. Marks on her lips and tongue suggested sharp objects had been involved. She had been a black belt in kickboxing. She had fought as hard as she could. She had written in her diary that she stayed with him so her daughter would not grow up without 2 parents. She tried to book a hotel room the night she was killed. She sent a message to a friend saying she was leaving. She had been trying to get out. The case that had been described in the Greek media as the work of a professional criminal gang, a premeditated robbery carried out by organized foreign nationals, was something else entirely. It was a murder committed by a husband, staged to look like something it never was, designed to cast suspicion on people who had nothing to do with it. In May 2022, Babis was found guilty of premeditated murder, preventing the course of justice, making false statements to authorities, and animal abuse. The daughter Caroline had stayed for, the child she had written about in her diary and referenced in her final text messages, was 11 months old when her mother died. She had been placed next to the body. She had been crying and clapping and trying to push her mother awake when first responders arrived. She would grow up without any memory of Caroline, exactly as Babis had said at the funeral, in words that had sounded like grief and were nothing of the kind. Caroline Crouch was 19 years old. She had grown up on an island she loved, beside water she loved, with a future she had tried and failed to escape toward. The fairy tale she had been handed at 15 had been a trap from the beginning, and the man who said it had spent 5 years tightening it until there was nowhere left to go.